Hello, and welcome to the George and Fay Yee Center for Healthcare Innovation, CHI's last session of the 2024-2025 academic year of the Patient Engagement Lunchtime Learning Series. My name is Maxa Sawyer. I am part of the Patient Engagement team. I'm a Patient Engagement Consultant and will moderate the session today. I will also take over coordinating the PAL in the 2025-2026 academic year. A couple housekeeping items before we get started. This series is accredited by the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada as a group learning activity. It may also be eligible for credits towards requirements of other professional bodies. We have auto transcript enabled, which can be toggled on or off at any time using the captions button at the bottom of your screen. Should you have any questions or comments, we invite you to submit them using the Q&A feature, also located at the bottom of your screen. This session will also be recorded and available for viewing afterwards, and attendees will receive this information in a follow-up email after the event. I would now like to invite Marianne Nermi to do the land acknowledgement.
Thanks so much. So here at the University of Manitoba, I know folks might be in different locations. I want to acknowledge that we're on Treaty 1 territory, which is the lands and waters of the Anishinaabe, Innuak, Ansininnuak, Dakota Oyate, and Dene peoples, and on the national homeland of the Red River Métis. And then I also want to acknowledge that our water is sourced from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation, which is on Treaty 3 territory. And I'll share my own positionality as I'm a white settler who's lived and worked in Winnipeg for pretty much all my life. And so I realized that myself and my family, we benefit and have benefited from the treaties. We also benefit from many colonial policies, some of which have caused harm towards Indigenous peoples whose lands that we're on. And so I try to think about a land acknowledgement sort of from that perspective as well, and about my responsibilities to disrupt some of the colonial ways of functioning, especially in the work that we do here in patient engagement. And I hope that in sort of breaking apart from the traditional, university structure and focusing on storytelling, that that is sort of one step towards doing things in a non-colonial fashion.
Thank you. Placing a story upon a person rather than empowering or enabling a person to tell their story in their own way creates a power imbalance that has the potential to reinforce the subconscious, the personal, and the systemic norms placed upon a system, inequity in the healthcare system. In empowering a person to be able to tell their story in whatever medium they are able, by reciprocating and sharing a piece of oneself, by witnessing and acknowledging the power of the small moments of connection that storytelling allows, one is momentarily allowing the imbalanced scales of power to shift to a more equitable space. In the wake of the global COVID-19 pandemic, alongside more local movements such as Silent No More, Black Lives Matter, the missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirited, or the inquest of the death of Brian Sinclair, an Indigenous man who died in the waiting room of a Winnipeg hospital while waiting for a routine catheter change. Health systems have been forced to see the role systemic bias and micro aggressions play in access to healthcare. In the case of Brian Sinclair, this story placed upon him as a person who needed time to dry up rather than a man in distress who needed a routine procedure resulted in his death. What would have happened if he was given a chance to structure his own story of self? What happens when we don't look? And what happens when we value a moment of connection? Placing a story upon a person creates a power imbalance I already read that. What does the story look like? What can we learn from patient engagement experience in telling their stories about themselves in their healthcare field? Today, we are going to hear from 3 people who have contributed to the healthcare equity by sharing their stories as patient partners. We welcome Ramona, Al, and Carrie. In the spirit of having the power to craft your own story, they are going to introduce themselves after the format of the roundtable is explained. We, the panel, are all sitting in a room together around a table, facing one another, listening, learning, and reflecting. After each person introduces themselves, we will start a conversation that is guided by questions the panel has received in advance. The questions will not ask for details of people's stories, rather, will focus on how each person creates their story and its impact on the self, patient partners, the audience, researcher, research, and the practice of patient engagement. In the spirit of reciprocal, respectful conversation, listening and reflecting, the speakers will show they would like to contribute to the conversation by picking up a speaking duck. We are all asked to keep our responses to 1 to 2 minutes so that in our short time together, everyone will be given the opportunity to share. Time will be monitored by Marianne Nurmi, knowledge broker for patient and public engagement at the Center for Health Innovation. We also ask that you, the audience, participate in our conversation using the Q&A button on the bottom of the screen. Please do not be shy. The Q&A button will be monitored by Marianne Nurmi as well. Your contributions throughout the roundtable will enrich the conversation. With that, I would like everyone to have the opportunity to introduce yourself, and we will start with the person on my left and go clockwise.
Thanks, Maxa. My name is Carrie Mackay. My pronouns are they, them. My lived experience in the healthcare system began 34 years ago when I was born 10 weeks premature, and I've had trickle-down effects of that ever since. But I started sharing my story online in 2008 when my chronic illness journey began, and have continued that ever since. So that's been quite a long time. The internet has changed a lot since 2008. I had my first experiences with patient engagement work in 2012, which led to political advocacy work 5 years later. And over the years, I have explored in various ways how storytelling helps us make sense of complex experiences and drives change across systems, including kind of my formative experiences in learning about storytelling for change through the Medicine X e-patient scholarship program at Stanford at their conference there. And I became involved in the CHI collaborative partnership in fall 2024 after connecting with the team through my role as the patient lead with the Managed Primary Care Research Network. However, my friend Liza, who previously worked for CHI, has been trying to get me to join the group for about 5 years. So I'm just a little bit behind.
Thank you. Ramona.
Hi, I'm Ramona. I share my insight and extensive experience as a patient and as a caregiver to inform, educate, and make changes to improve the outcomes for people accessing our healthcare system. My involvement with Shared Health Patient and Family Advisor Group came after my mother had been traumatized repeatedly during an in-hospital stay, and trying to find ways to have people make change. And a very dear friend connected me, and so that's where I began with this program.
Thank you. Al.
I'm a person with the lived experience of homelessness who, if I can use the term, victim of healthcare inequity as a homeless person, nearly cost me my life. I was rejected multiple times by the system, leading to a suicide attempt, which I unfortunately had to survive. And I'm one of the lucky few to come out of homelessness and be able to tell this story and pay it forward. And one day I got to we actually applied for a PrEP award, and that actually led to me speaking to CHI about 4 years ago, something like that. And from there, CHI and telling my story to CHI and my experiences and how do we change the healthcare system to better serve the vulnerable. And from that, I became a part of CHI and now work within many areas of the healthcare system with Cancer Care Manitoba. But I cherish my work and my time with CHI because it's such an important place to it's a foundation to moving the dial and making changes within the system.
Thank you everyone for your introductions. With that, I'd like everyone in the audience, everyone here to take a moment to notice where you are, notice how you're feeling. Take a deep breath and really be present and listening to everyone's stories and everyone's manifestations of stories. And I will start with the first question. What do you do when preparing to tell your story as part of the Patient and Public Engagement Collaborative Partnership? Practically, spiritually, emotionally? Let's hear your stories.
Mine is simple. I think I've told the story, 500 times, 500 times or something. I make notes, but I never use them. But I do lean on my experiences, and if I can say remember stories, I always say remember experiences. Something different comes up every single time I tell my story. Something that is pertinent to the people I'm speaking to. I really dig deep to find the right answer. I focus a little bit on object, when I'm preparing for a heavy duty speech. And so that is my way of drawing myself into the talk, just to clear my head on everything else.
Thank you, Ramona.
So I've prepared written notes for the stories that I share, and depending on what the theme is for the event, will determine which story I'm going to share and how I'll share it as well. So in advance, I'll review the information I've been provided, and then I'll repeat my story. I'll say it out loud several times and put myself into that space, so that I connect well to that experience. So when I speak about it, it's coming from the heart, and making sure that as well that I'm taking care of myself and being mindful to be calm and to put myself into a good mindset and a good physical space to be able to deliver. And then after I'm done, to take my quiet time or whatever I need to fill myself with goodness out.
Gary.
Yeah, so I think, like both of my fellow participants have said, definitely like note taking, reading over notes that I've made previously, having, just like a Word document or a piece of paper. And then because so much of my journey is online, I can find myself checking back to like blog posts and social media posts that are already public and just seeing how I can weave certain things in. I'm also lucky that I have a friend who has done a lot of similar work. And so very often I will call my friend Gia in Brampton, and we will just, mostly lament how much we hate writing bios. But then, then go into like, some of the more practical aspects if that's needed. And I'm really not sure if that's, an emotional or practical support at this point in time. It's kind of both. So.
How do you separate the emotional from the practical?
Sorry, you didn't grab my duck.
We gotta keep the ducks in a row.
How do you separate the emotional from the practical? I think you have to blend them. I blend them because it all depends on who I'm speaking to. If it's a right-brained audience or left-brained audience, but you have to. I combine both my emotional. Every single talk I do is practical and emotional at the same time. Yeah, because we have to reach people, and you don't reach people unless you're bringing emotional impact.
Ramona.
Yeah, I agree with Ella on that. And I look at the way I've told my story and repeatedly, again, preparing in advance, that I know there's certain parts when I say it, even though I've told the story 100 times, there's that particular point of impact where it strikes a chord in me. And I hope that it strikes a chord in the audience as well, because then I know that I've hit the mark. And that's what I'm trying to do, is make that connection in a meaningful way that people go away. And that's like, if I touched you emotionally, you'll remember my story forever.
I'm curious, I'm hearing that A lot of you have told your story over and over and over again. When does the story stop being yours and start being part of the audience's?
Um. Again, it will always be mine, but my hope is that it's everybody's story once I'm done. And I would say reach the mind and the heart follows. And we need to reach into people's hearts with their stories and bring something out. And I think a lot of people, I'm not sure only having somebody else own your story is the right word, but I think it belongs to everybody. You know, to be used for the right purposes and to move to the system and the process forward.
When I share a story, and of course, preparing in advance so that I am in the mindset to share it efficiently and effectively, and to honor the people who are involved in those stories. And one of the stories I share is Vern's story. And I've told it many, many times. But as I share the story, I let the people know that I asked Vern if I could share our story, because Vern and I had been apart for many years. And but his lived experience with healthcare was during our time together, and it was so meaningful, and it was so important to me that we share it. And when I asked him permission, he said absolutely. So I make sure that people know that I'm doing this, and I'm doing it with permission as well. And it helps to I think it demonstrates respect for the people who are involved in this lived experience.
We're talking very publicly about something that's traditionally very private. How do you protect yourselves and the people you love? Gary.
So I think for me, my perspective might be a little bit different than I often hear from patient partners. So I'm generally not telling my story in a room full of people. I'm telling my story to the internet at large. And so by nature of that, the audience is who kind of is seeking out the content rather than who has ended up in a room at a certain time and place. So for me, I'm very much an open book, you know, kind of for better or for worse at this point, I guess. And just the fact that I've been, you know, sharing my story online since I was 16, that process has changed, but you know, I share different things and that's morphed over time. I mean, I was asked this question once at a conference that I was at, and I got pulled up onto an impromptu panel about being online and telling stories online. And at that point in time, I had just transitioned to putting my last name up online. And you know, so I was specifically asked about that because the moderator knew me well, and he said that he had noticed that. And you know, so like that was kind of my like one piece for a while, and now my last name is also associated with everything. But you know, it feels like a little bit different for me because there's like not a lot that I don't put online. So you know, my personal identifying details, I try not to put too much of that. But yeah, I don't have a lot of walls in terms of what I will and won't put out.
Thank you. I'm in a really awkward situation when it comes to that question. I've been in the media officially 305 times in the mainstream media 305 times, not counting my radio show. So anybody that's associated with me and my family have to get used to it. This is my life, and if I need to share it, I will share it. And as a person with lived experience, I do feel a huge responsibility to get the word out there, to let people become aware of their situations and the issues of homelessness, poverty within the healthcare system as well.
As I mentioned, I share Vern's story, and that there's probably more information I share about that, more specific details for our family. However, when I share my mother's story, I never share my mother's name. I don't share any identification about her out of respect to honor her memory and her wishes. But she always believed the medical field could learn something from her. And so that's how I make sure I honor her, but again, with no identification, so that you wouldn't be able to trace it back to her. Because it is her story.
I just want to interrupt, we had a question from the audience, who you're seeing and whose faces you're seeing is intentional. So that's what we are, one of the practices of patient engagement is respect, is number one. And this is how we're choosing to respect everyone who's on the panel. So,
Thank you.
do you ever get up there and feel like you have nothing to share?
You know what?
Curious.
Yeah. Well, every once in a while, my brain goes dead. You know, try as I might in the morning, because I'm gonna give a United Way talk or something, I get up there, I have nothing to say.
Really?
But sometimes those become the best talks,
Wow.
because what is supposed to come out, comes out. That's sometimes the way my brain works. It just, I'm overloaded sometimes, and I'm up there nothing, you know, and but sometimes those are the very best, you know, because it's totally natural, there's nothing prepared at all.
If I
That
dare,
answers it.
if I dare, I just want to share my own feelings about feeling like I have nothing to share. I'm very new to the healthcare system. And I was asked to do this panel and I was like, and I have to ask myself, even though I've been alive for however many years I've been alive and I've experienced so many different healthcare experiences, why do I feel like I have nothing to say? And that nobody wants to hear my voice. And then listening back to my voice, I almost cringe and say, why did I share that? So I'm here as a person who feels like she has nothing to share, but I'm sharing it anyway. And that's, every time I do that, I get a little bit more empowered to sort of think maybe my voice matters. I don't know.
Everybody's voice.
So I'll just quickly say, there's a question online. Participant says, first of all, thank you for sharing your wonderful lived experiences. I'm assuming that all of you have encountered patients from different ethnicities. May I ask how the ethnocultural diversity, so things like culture, language, traditions, religions of an individual affects storytelling?
I'll be short. As a person who's been a case manager, intensive case manager in a housing program, as a person who houses people, as a person who's seen discrimination within the system and without, you know, outside of the system. I know that there's still, I'm sorry everybody, but there's still discriminatory practices going on. We see it in almost every single rich room, every time I'm in one. And I think that we still have a lot of work to do when it comes to, if this is the answer to the question, I think it is, but we still have so much work to do when it comes to regarding every ethnic person with the same respect. We have a long way to go.
Who's seen as too loud, too quiet, oversharing, undersharing? Whose truth is valued? Over exaggerating? Who feels comfortable sharing their story in what spaces? Carrie, you had the duck. Do you still want to say something?
No, I will save it, I think, because I can't remember exactly what it was.
Okay, when you remember it, let us
Yeah.
know.
I don't understand the question. Could you repeat the question?
Oh, Carrie had the duck, and I was wondering if they still had something to say.
No.
Oh, about the ethno national?
Yeah.
Oh, that Oh, sorry, that wasn't a question, that was just my reflection.
Oh, okay.
So that-
I will just share, there's another interesting question from folks online. Somebody asked if, oh yeah, thank you.
You're
Just
welcome.
like I can hear, so someone's asking, if I were to ask you to share your story, is there something you'd like me to add or offer specifically in my ask to make it easier or safer or more comfortable for you to share? So that's the question.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I like to know who the audience is. I want to know, are they present in the room with me? Is it going to be online? I want to know how it's going to be broadcast, how that information will be shared beyond that moment. I also would like to know, what's their reason? Why would you like me to share my story? Because if it's only to check mark a box that you've done it for it to meet your accreditation, that just feels a little tainted to me. That doesn't, it's tokenistic. But certainly I am happy to share in a way that can accommodate, and maybe people need to get an introduction to what it's like to hear somebody's lived experience. Because it does take you outside, it could take you outside your comfort zone. And especially when you're talking about trauma. So want to know what your theme is for that event. And to be mindful so that, we don't overshare, because I'm sure you get it. Yeah, it's like there's that risk we can overshare. But just setting what you see as your vision for that event. And then we can have a conversation so that it will fit well for both of us.
Yeah, what a great question.
Yeah.
Answer, yeah, it's so important.
I just want to remind, just ducks, we use the ducks so that we remember, so I know who to go to next.
I totally agree, and one of the questions I always ask is, who is the audience and why do you want me, right? I don't want to hear, well, we heard you one time, that's not good enough. It's thank you, I'm grateful, but what is the purpose of this? Right? Yeah, because we always want to reach people, that's it. And in person is great because I read eyes, I read faces, I'm an old sales guy, I read body language. I read body language, it's so important to be there in person if you can. Right? This is great though.
Well, we're sort of in person.
Yeah, I think as well, just like what the, what the person is expecting to get out of that story that they're asking me to tell, right? And so, I've done in-person speaking a little bit, I've done more online stuff, blogs, podcasts, videos, stuff like that, and just like, what is the objective of why the ask is being made? Because one, to make sure that I touch on that while we are, going about the storytelling piece, but also just to, I can help frame what that's going to look like and how you craft the story for that environment or for that audience.
And can I extend that question to how can an audience prepare and what does a good audience look like?
Yeah, great.
A good audience is one that is attentive to the speaker, whoever is speaking at that time. Because when we come to share our lived experience, this is valuable information. This is valuable experiences that we may not want to share with just anybody. So I'm hopeful. Again, my purpose is to share my lived experience to inform, educate, and make changes. So if you're truly interested in hearing that, then you'll listen undistracted. I get sometimes we have to use technology as adaptive devices for people to participate actively. But I did a session one time and I was speaking with nursing students and this person was texting as I was talking about a trauma event. And she did it 3 times. And by the 3rd time, I know I was giving her stink eye. I couldn't think of anything to say. It triggered me in a bad way. So I like an audience who is attentive. And if somebody isn't, I guess if it were to happen again now, I would just stop and wait for them to finish. But likewise, if people have things that are distracting them, then maybe you're not going to be an active listener that day, and maybe they should not participate. And that's on them, not on me. But yeah, it's nice to know that people come forward and they're interested in learning from us. But it has to go both ways, respect and dignity in that.
Can you repeat the question?
What makes a good audience?
Yeah. Yeah, a good audience is, they don't all have to be sitting on the edge of their seats. But I look into every single eye. This morning, I was with the Winnipeg Fire Paramedic Service, and it was the hardest room I've ever been speaking to. And when people sit there stone faced and don't react emotionally or physically at all, you get trouble. So what I do is every once in a while, I will go and particularly point to the person, ask a question, which I did this morning, which I'm not turning it over well. These are the texts we were talking about. But no, I expect some engagement. I expect some questions, and if you're really interested, you're going to ask me a question about it, right? And again, I empathize with you on your people looking at the words you're texting or something. It's nothing more disrespectful than that. But I expect respect from my audience.
Carrie, what does that look like in the online space?
Yeah, it's been more challenging because it's like you don't get immediate feedback generally. So it's far more asynchronous. Like, when I started blogging, back in 2008, I had this kind of blog that was very specific to like my asthma journey and like my patient story. And then, within about 5 years, I kind of merged that into a space that was more like general information. And since then I've taken that more to like social media like Instagram and Facebook to a lesser extent. And Twitter used to be big before it was a dumpster fire. But so like so the audience is much different in the online context because everything you're getting back from an audience, unless you're doing a live stream, is very asynchronous, and you don't know what's gonna meet people where they are until they're there. But you also have the opportunity that you are not having to generalize. The people who want to be reading or hearing or taking in your story are the people who are there, and that's why they found you. So it so it's like it's very different because I don't get immediate feedback, but I also get feedback from people who want to be looking at the content that I'm creating.
I'd like to thank all the audience who's been participating. It's really been making our discussion better. Marianne has another
Really great.
question.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Questions are great.
Yeah, lots of
Yeah.
excellent. Yeah, thanks, everyone. So I'm gonna try to make this succinct. Okay, so the comment was made at the start of this panel that everyone has shared their stories of lived experiences many times. I'm wondering if panel members would have any reflections about if you've seen a shift over time in terms of how stories are received, and whether you felt there were system impacts stemming from your sharing. And also, has anyone ever followed up to share any changes that have come from their engagement with having lived experiences shared, if that makes sense. I think that makes sense. Great question. I might just put these two questions together because they're kind of related. And then, because there's another question that says, how do you work with the trauma of sharing your story over and over? And how can, as folks listening to your stories, how can we support those who share? So it's kind of like two bits there, if that makes sense.
So if I'm understanding, the question is, how has telling your story changed over time, or the impact has changed over time? So telling your story and the impact over time. And then the second part was trauma informed.
Correct.
Okay.
So for me, from like an online context, the kind of nice thing about that is that like I've written blog posts about traumatic experience in healthcare, but I only have to write them once, right? And so it's like, so I'm not telling that story over and over, but it is available for people who want to read it at any point in time. And elements of that will come back in stories I tell at later dates, right? Which is why, like the whole linking within thing is so great because you don't have to rehash everything. yeah, so that does make the online context a little bit different again, because I don't have to say the things I've already said. Which is very helpful. I mean, and just like in the, like, kind of to the other point, at my job, I am now, I work for an MLA's office, and I now receive people's stories on a daily basis, and things that they want in terms of policy change and how that's going to affect more people. And, you know, I really like to, I'm very grateful that I'm in that position, but I also know that, for me, I know the value of those stories, and I know how difficult it can be to share those stories. And so I do make sure that I am, you know, responding to our constituents with the most compassion and grace possible, and trying to get answers for them, right? And policy change is very, very slow, but yeah, but sometimes there are things we can do, and a lot of the times it's knowing that somebody is listening, and whether that's in your physical audience and an online audience, or in the government. I think those are all, you know, knowing somebody's listening is kind of, it's the reason that we all share the things that we share.
I find it very interesting that you say once you write it, you only have to tell it once. And I'm thinking about my own writing process and that process of editing. And sometimes when I write my story, I just like, it almost comes out of me like rapid fire. And then that process of editing the story is so painful. And then I have to say it out loud every once in a while. And somehow it's less, because I've gone through that pain. And in going through that pain, I am forcing myself to confront it and heal and get some distance. And it's transformative in a way.
You talked about impact, and yeah, you know, this is huge. This is one of the biggest things, because as advocates, and you know, and the work we do, it's very difficult work, and sometimes you feel like you're never going to get out of the mud, and you don't know whether you're making a difference or not. I've had several experiences. People ask me, well, okay, but did you make a difference? Well, you're not going to know that right away. I've spent a lot of time with the federal government, senior policy analysts, senior policy writers on homelessness, with the Department of Homeless Policy Directive, something else now. Infrastructure Canada changes all the time. But I spoke to several different departments and across the country. You know, they were spread out over the entire country, and it was over Zoom. We spent 6 hours with people, and I got so much great feedback. But about a year later, I got an email from the director of the department, said, you know, we changed a couple of things because of what you said. And on the immediate, I had several of the senior policy analysts say, I had to go back to my document I was writing and change it because of something that you said. Okay. Then you know, your heart breaks and you start crying. But it does. And when I was at that chain B with my cardiac arrest, my heart attack several years ago, I think I told you this story. I'd spent several workshops with the emergency and triage departments, talking about my experiences within the healthcare system, within the emergency department. And I was in CB for my cardiac arrest. And one of my nurses came up to me, and when I was in the TV room watching TV one night at like 2 o'clock in the morning, and said, I was in emergency care, urgent care back then, and I was in one of your workshops. And I just quit because of what you said, because it hit me so hard. And I carried so much judgment and bias and discrimination with me, because you were speaking about treating people on Main Street differently than people in River Heights and Wellington Crescent. And she said, you know, that just broke me down, and I had to change everything I did about my care to clear my conscience and make myself feel better. So I just want to thank you for that. This is kind of why we do this stuff, right? You know, and so sometimes, but we have to hear those stories. And if you guys out there know that something changed, has changed lived experience stories have made a difference, let us know because we need to hear it.
I mean, you're invited in the room,
Yeah.
and I think 10-15 years ago, would that have happened?
No, never. I would not have gotten for the federal government. Never.
Yeah.
So sharing, the way things have changed, sharing my story for impact. When I first started sharing my story, it was with United Way, and that's where I first met Al. Because I'm on loan as a sponsored executive, and I did that program for 4 years. So sharing my story, it was very different, and the motivation was different, right, Al? Because then when you're doing it with that, you're looking for the donation dollars
Yeah.
that are going into the community to help support those important
Entirely.
programs that we've got, and we've got so many in Winnipeg. We're so fortunate. So sharing my story about mom, and it came because of my involvement with United Way and learning about the Canadian Mental Health Association. So then it's moved on now because I no longer I'm doing the speaking engagements with United Way, but to share that story about my mom, and it's so impactful. So I had to adapt my story for the new audience that I'm dealing with, because now we're speaking for impact here, and the
Yes.
impact is we want change in our healthcare. We want the way the services are delivered. We want it all the way across the board. So I make the message so that it touches the audience in a way that you can connect to it. So yes, I've definitely, that story has changed tremendously, and the way I tell it has changed as well. And that part of that came as a patient family advisor. I've been fortunate enough to work very closely with Susie McLeod, who's our consultant, and her and I have co-developed and co-facilitate speaking for impact training. And that was a really good experience for me, being able to share my knowledge and experience from what I learned as a speaker with United Way. Plus, I did community outreach and public education as an employee of Canada Revenue Agency. So very much used to being out in the public and talking. And so bringing it in with Susie and helping people to learn how to share their story, we've developed the training. So I went through and did the training to rewrite the story. So I rewrote Vern's story, and it triggered things because I looked at it differently. Every time you sit down and you really focus your attention on it and you look through a different lens, you ask yourself different questions and prepare in a different way, then meaningful moments come up. And what do I want to leave the audience with? And I mean, I'm fortunate with Vern's story. There were so many great, meaningful moments. It was a really very challenging experience in life, but I want to share what made it work and what didn't work, and could we do better? So again, looking at how we share our impact stories for impact, there's ways to do it. And certainly I will continue to adapt new ways based on the audience and what I know.
I have one question and then we'll get to the audience question. I'm thinking about the word story, and I know story and storytelling is a bit of a buzzword. And are we influencers?
I prefer that word.
Influencer. I'm looking at the word story from the perspective of an 8-year-old and a perspective of a doctor.
Yeah.
And from an 8-year-old, I hear my son's voice going, "Mommy, is that true?" And from a doctor's perspective, maybe I'm hearing, "How much more time? Oh, I gotta get to the next patient," or "they're exaggerating," or no big deal. So what does the word story mean to you?
Mhm.
When Susie and I started to prepare for developing the Speaking for Impact series, I looked at the storytelling because that was a negative for me. Like,
Yeah.
I felt like, no, I'm sharing my lived experience. I'm sharing my lived expertise. And then I had to search out, why was storytelling so, like, why did it hold a negative spot in my heart? And I recognized, like, there was a situation that happened way back when, and somebody telling me, well, now tell me a story I can believe. And so I started to research, and I looked at the Indigenous culture because, again, that's part of my family history as well. And I thought, okay, as I read about it, it actually changed the way I thought. It changed the wiring for sure. One of the things that I found, a quote says, "Tell me a fact and I'll learn. Tell me a truth and I'll believe, but tell me a story and it will live in my heart forever." A North American Indian proverb. And it was like, okay, you know what? That gives true value and meaning to what I'm saying. That person who had the negative poo-poo, well, that was on them. But so again, I think I've rethought my vision of how does that sit with me? So I now introduce it as sharing my story. And it's comfortable, but you got to say it in a way that is comfortable for you. So like you saying, Al, I mean, you've got your way of saying it and that sits well with you. Never know when it's going to change though, right?
Carrie?
So to me, like a story is somebody's experience. It can be like long, it can be short, it can be a snippet of a specific experience, or like an experience from the beginning to the end, or of their whole lifetime, right? I mean, and kind of like what people choose, ever that story is most important to them, or how they tell it is, there's a reason for that. And sometimes like if you're omitting something, it's not because you don't necessarily want that shared. It could be context dependent, right? Or it could be that it's not the right moment for that piece, or you don't know that the audience is prepared for that. And it's also fine, like if you're not ready for that. And like I also think too that this is not necessarily in this question, but for those of us who are telling stories, it's also equally important to often just sit back and listen and process other people's stories and how those might have an impact on our own stories and how we share our own experience.
Yeah, I find listening very difficult, and it's a practice.
I agree.
Yeah, the word story can be overdone and is overused maybe, but how do you reach people without telling a story, right? And how do you bring out emotion without telling a story? Whether people believe it or not, if you can reach them, fine. Like every single training I do, whether it's 2 hours, 3 hours, 6 hours, I start with a story for 45 minutes. Just to bring context, because sometimes the stories bring context to what we're doing today, changing healthcare system. Starts with stories, but it also is the beginning. Stories are the beginning, but we have to use the word stories as much as it's overdone, to draw context to what we're actually doing. I think you get on to eat potatoes.
So I'll share a little bit about some of the questions online. So I think I can do a little bit of summarizing in a way. So somebody's asking, does the oversharing boundary, does the sharing and boundary shift with the audience? Perhaps depending on the audience experience, you might have to overshare to get the message across and make a point that could initiate change. Another person asked, do you mention any recourse you took, such as complaining to a regulator of healthcare professionals, such as College of Physicians, etc. So I guess what they're getting at is, do you share something like an experience of having made a formal complaint? Do you share that kind of thing? So those are kind of related questions. Do you move that boundary in order to make impact? And then how much do you share in terms of if you've made a complaint?
That's multiple.
Yeah.
Who has a duck?
Yeah.
I'm doing quick.
Okay. We'll get the ducks in a row.
I have another.
Sorry. Yeah.
No worries. I have another experience within the healthcare system when I had a heart attack. When I left hospital, I was not released in the proper manner. I was not given proper information. I needed a medication that I needed to take every 24 hours that was not given to me. The hospital did not communicate with the pharmacy, did not communicate with me that this was a special dispensation drug. I thought I was going to die because I needed to take it, and I only had 1 day. So that's all the hospital gave me. And so I did, actually, and my doctor dropped the ball. my doctor dropped the ball, did not call for special dispensation. I called the College of Physicians and Surgeons and reported it. And it was necessary. Oh, actually, that person's not a doctor in Manitoba anymore. For other reasons, I'm sure. But it's really important, and I had to tell that particular story. It was my experience, but it was also a story that they needed to hear. The experiences and stories are interwoven, but it was my experience, and it could have cost me my life, and so I really felt that I had to go to the College of Physicians and Surgeons. And as an advocate, if I can't advocate for myself, then what good am I to anybody else, right? And this is my job 24/7. And so, you know, sometimes we have to go to higher authorities and speak to, you know, to the powers that be. But that was after.
I certainly, I have shared when, especially when I've talked about my mom's story, because that's where we had, the most situations where the healthcare system did not properly support her or myself on her healthcare journey. And the story that I've been sharing most recently about her lived experience in hospital when she was traumatized, I share that I went to patient services after because we received a bill for delay to transfer her transfer to personal care was delayed. So we charged her daily rate, and I said, I'm not paying that. And I went to patient services, and they that was an interesting conversation. I asked the person, I said, my mother was traumatized in hospital, and now you're asking me to pay for this as well. And she didn't have a lot to say, and I said, like, do you not provide trauma-informed care? And she said, no, we don't do that. And that really just triggered me in a bad way. And I said, so what am I to do to ensure that if my mother is hospitalized in the future, if I am, to ensure that those similar trauma events don't happen to us? And her response did nothing to reassure me that our needs were being met. And that's how I became involved as a patient family advisor. Because like we're saying now, I mean, we've got so many stories to share, right? We got a lifetime of it. And when we share our stories like you do online and you're blogging, and I mean, we got to hear the bad stuff, because if you candy coat it, I ran out of candy coating a long time ago. Not Willy Wonka. I think that if we hear about the bad stuff, then that's how we can truly make the changes that are going to be lasting and impactful and improve the outcomes for people.
We have 5 minutes left. And yeah, time goes by when you're making a change, right? I want to know, in one sentence or two, what are you going to do next? How are you going to take care of yourself? How are you going to decompress? How do you make sure that you can tell your story again? Maybe, can I go counterclock? I'll go counterclock.
Yeah. Oh, no. Self-care. Yeah, I had a minor heart attack last week, which tells you a little bit about my self-care. It's difficult. I'm also a caregiver, which makes my life doubly hard. And it's a 24/7 obligation that I carry. I golf. You know, I've gone golfing twice already, and it takes me 5 hours away from the world and my work. And whether I shoot the worst round of golf I've ever shot or the best round, I don't care. I'm away with, you know, everything, my responsibilities. It's really important, as I say, if you don't look after yourself, account after anybody else. And there's a lot of truth to that, and I'm trying to make a really big difference in my life this year on that. And my doctor said you can't do 60-hour weeks anymore. But we're working hard at it, because I feel what I do has importance in this world, and so I actually do have to. It's kind of self-evident to continue doing that.
Thank you.
For me, after I like to go for a walk in nature. So while you go golfing, I had to give up golf, unfortunately. However, there's still like the beauty of nature. It's so grounding. Often I'll, like, from here I might even go to the Forks just to be, and with no pressure. I have a few things I have to do in the city, but then certainly this evening, as I'm out in the back outside of the city, then that's when I'll truly relax and just appreciate the quiet, go sit by the lake, and enjoy just the sounds of nature.
Perfect.
Carrie?
So I don't do anything specific. When I was writing my notes for this, I kind of was just like, I move on to the next thing. And, that's what I'm doing today. CHI is doing a pride walk right after this, so I'm going to the pride walk, I'm going to see a friend, and then I'm, going for a work meeting this evening. So, but I'm sure I will also, debrief with a friend who's watching this right now and, and at least get some feedback from her if nothing else. So, yeah, but basically just go on to the next thing and process it later, if at all.
Yeah.
Any last remarks from the audience?
Yeah, I was trying to save the questions because there are actually quite a few comments, so sorry, I was just trying to save them here. I don't know if everybody's in a huge rush. There's a lot to sort of
Common theme?
Hey, this
common
question.
theme. There's a good one here. Well, so since we're talking about self-care, like what has been the most rewarding or healing part of sharing your stories? Or I guess I should say, is there a healing component? Is there a rewarding component? And how would you talk about that healing
Absolutely.
component? So that's one of the questions.
Sorry, we only have 3 more minutes,
Okay.
and I
Yeah,
want to be respectful of
okay.
people's time.
Yeah.
So in 10 seconds or less.
In 10 seconds, it's when I share and when people, you can see that you've touched somebody, you can see by the body language, the
Okay.
eyes, right? Even just like the sign language, when people are holding their hands
Yep.
together in a prayer like manner, people who just say thank you. Just a simple thank you, and you can tell by the sincerity of their voice and the look in their eyes and even just saying it, that touches me so deeply.
Yes. Simple feedback, good or bad. It's all goes smart. It just shows that people are listening. So if you do not want to speak to deaf, it's just something that falls on deaf ears, right? So any feedback, good or bad, is awesome. Thank you, folks, for all of these.
There's a lot of great
Yeah, thank you.
questions, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very lucky just with the trajectory of how my storytelling journey has gone. I've had, opportunities for, a bit of travel, a bit of work, and I've made really, like, some of my best friends are people I've met online through, patient experience stuff. And, so, those things are all very, like, personally meaningful to me. And having been doing this since 2008, it's, very different world now than it was then. But yeah, just, that engagement with other people and knowing that, that I've done or said something that has been, impactful to them or has helped them make more sense of their own situation. Those are the kind of things that I've taken away.
I started this conversation by asking everyone to take a deep breath, and I'd like everyone to sort of end by taking 3 deep breaths in and out, just to calm our nervous systems. Thank you so much. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to our audience. Thank you to everyone who helped moderate and do this tag. Thank you for attending our session. You'll receive a follow-up email with further information on how to access the slides and recording. We also welcome your feedback for this session, which will come as a prompt to complete a short survey following the closing of the webinar. And we will go over the questions that you asked and respect that you've taken the time to write them, and perhaps they'll come in the next panel. Thanks again, and wishing you all a great rest of your day.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.